This is Going Inside, Healing Trauma from the Inside Out. Hosted by me, licensed trauma therapist John Clarke, Going Inside is a weekly podcast on a mission to help you heal from trauma and connect with your authentic self. Tune in for enlightening guest interviews, immersive solo deep dives, real-life therapy sessions, and soothing guided meditations. Follow me on socials at John Clarke Therapy on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarketherapy.com. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. Dana Carretta-Stein is a licensed mental health counselor, EMDR consultant, author, and owner of Peaceful Living in Scarsdale, New York. Dana is passionate about the importance of trauma-informed care and the effect it has on emotional, physical, and mental well-being. She loves to learn about and educate others on compassionate, evidence-based, and effective counseling interventions to help individuals of all ages achieve fulfilling relationships and optimal wellness. Dana, how are you doing? It's so good to see you after many years.
Many years. I'm doing really well. Just very excited to see you and just pick up where we left off.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, just a little insight for the listeners. I met Dana at a business retreat basically years ago. This was Joe Sanok's retreat. And I was kind of going with my other business, my business coaching business, private practice workshop. And yeah, and you were working on your business as well.
Yeah, like building the practice and just getting more into trauma-focused stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, how you got to where you're at today. I stumbled across your Instagram where you're making some really amazing EMDR content, trauma content, and built up quite the following. You've got some books under your belt. It's really cool to see what you've built. But yeah, maybe just building off of the intro there, what else should people know about you?
Yeah, I'm just super passionate about trauma-informed care. I've spent so much time in the therapy world of focusing on diagnosis and anxiety and things like that. And then, once you get trained in EMDR therapy, you really zoom out and see wow, it's really not about pathologizing people at all, but about getting curious about what happened to them and starting to see the whole person. And that's just what I feel like my life's work is to help make that really easy to understand and make wellness really easy to achieve for as many people as possible. It's my love. And yeah, that
So
and a emotional
cool.
mom and a wife and those fun things too.
Yeah,
And I love my kids more than life itself.
totally. Yeah, I heard this on a podcast the other day that some high percentage of graduate schools do not train therapists to treat trauma, which resonated with me and was the situation I found myself in after, 6 or 7 years in the field and having a lot of clients talk about their trauma, not knowing that unintentionally I was probably making it worse or exposing them to their own traumatic memories and doing nothing about it other than reflecting and
We
going,
don't
this
know
sounds
what we
really
don't
hard.
know.
Until I got EMDR trained in 2015, and then the Monday after the training, it's like, I'm going to start using this to actually help people move forward, and process these traumatic memories. So I'm curious, how you came to EMDR and why EMDR out of all the different modalities for treating trauma.
Yeah. So I was actually really, really lucky. I graduated, and right after I graduated, I connected with Barbara Heffernan, who's an amazing psychotherapist. She was in Norwalk, Connecticut at the time, and she took me on as part of her group practice. And, I was brand new, really hadn't worked anywhere yet besides, when I was doing clinicals and stuff. And she said, I do a lot of EMDR therapy, you should check out the training. And I said to her, what's that? Never heard of it, wasn't taught in school. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do the training. I'm new, I'd love to learn. Did the training and was really at an advantage because I hadn't really gotten very ingrained in any type of modality yet. So I really got, EMDR was the first thing that I really took and grabbed hold of. And thank God for that. And yeah, that's how I found it. I did the training and just got more and more into it after the training, did consultation, got certified, became a consultant. And, trauma is, the more you learn about it, the more you're like, wow, how does not everybody see this?
Right.
Yeah.
It really does give a new lens for things, or even when, as we talk about pathology or someone comes in and says, what brings them to therapy maybe is anxiety, or they're drinking too much to tamp down a nervous system response that is, guess what, driven, the fuel for that is trauma, right? Or the engine for that is trauma, or untreated trauma.
Right.
Even people that a lot of times like either have been to traditional talk therapy, or in my my group practice, everyone is EMDR trained. We're all trauma therapists. A lot of therapists will send people to us as an adjunct to say, hey, we're doing traditional talk therapy and it's not working right, or this trauma piece is like in
They're
the
stuck.
way. They're
Yeah.
stuck. And so they come to us for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where EMDR can be amazing because it can be done adjunctively.
Right.
And, one thing I always say is to make sure, the EMDR therapist does communicate with the weekly therapist, just so there's no triangulation or things like that can
Hmm.
happen. But it does really help because, everybody needs to talk. And so talk therapy can be really beneficial to people. So they might not want to give that up, but they do need that other something of, you sit with clients and you hear their story and you're like, okay, we know where it's coming from. Now what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now what do we do? And you're kind of stuck if you're not trained in EMDR, you yourself feel stuck because you're like, okay, but it's not cognitive. I don't know what to do with this now. Now what?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What to do with it, right? Once you get a client talking about their trauma, what to do with it, right? And again,
Right.
that's the dilemma I found myself in. I want to step back for a second and kind of well, you can pretend like I know nothing about EMDR because you're the first person on this podcast to come and talk about EMDR. And so, um, uh, uh, first of all, for the people listening, people dealing with trauma in their lives, um, how do you know if EMDR is right for you? How do you prepare for it? How do you know if it's working? How do you find an EMDR therapist? I know you have a book that helps clients navigate the process of EMDR. So I'm really curious to integrate that into the conversation. But yeah, maybe just starting from like, what is EMDR and how do you know if it could help you?
Yeah. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And there's all these words that sound computer like in the EMDR language. And it really drives me a little crazy. Like there's all these protocols and there's processing. And basically, it's a trauma informed model. So you know if it's right for you if you have present day symptoms that are rooted in past experiences. That being said, some people don't realize that it's rooted in past experiences. They're like, well, I'm just an anxious person. Nobody's born an anxious person. We're born with a nervous system that's wired for protection and survival. But if you're starting to label yourself as an anxious person, that chronic anxiety was learned somewhere. So it's about taking those present day struggles where you're struggling in your life, whether it's, anxiety, feeling depressed, struggling in your present day relationships, and connecting that to earlier life experiences and then actually processing them. And we can get into what that means,
Yeah.
but really helping your brain relearn those events so that they're no longer stuck in their natural raw state, so that your brain still feels like they're still happening right
Yeah.
now.
Yep. Can you maybe talk about this idea of like really what is trauma? I had a client recently who came to me and said, um, I don't have any trauma, nothing significant like that in my life. And then he immediately went into this story about how he was severely bullied in preschool. So it's like,
Right.
I think that, there's confusion around what is trauma, or if I haven't like been to war and back, do I have trauma or could I have PTSD? Right.
Right. Right. The easiest way to define trauma is trauma, and this is really from Gabor Mate, who I love, is trauma is an experience. Trauma is what goes on inside of you as a result of what happened to you. So you can have an incident like, just natural disaster, for example, to use like a common one. And one person might be traumatized from it and one person might not be. The event itself, yes, we might perceive as traumatic in, just day to day, but how that person felt, how they perceived that experience is what impacts whether or not they were traumatized from it. So it's
So,
really about the
yeah.
internal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw out another example here. A personal example is I was an EMT for 4 years, and,
Oh, wow,
looking
I never
back on
knew
that
that about you.
experience, yeah, it was a huge part of my life, and, like any EMT or first responder, I was exposed to horrific scenes,
Sure.
and I would run hundreds and hundreds of calls every single year, right? Sometimes, 5, 10 calls in a day, right? And those people are having the worst day of their life, and you're going and helping. Out of all of those years and all those, thousands of calls or whatever, um, there was really only one that stood with me or stuck with me. Sorry.
Yeah.
See, my trauma is starting to scramble my brain. Uh, and it had to do with helplessness. I went on a call where basically I thought we were ready for the call, and then some people didn't show up, and people didn't want to go into the house with me to help. So
Mm,
even though I was like prepared in uniform, similar to like an ER doctor, right? They're seeing horrible things, but they have tools and resources to help and do something about it. My
right,
sense of agency was disrupted then, right?
right.
I was going into this stressful situation, but then no one was helping me. So
Yeah.
that one stood out to me and taught me so much for me about like what is trauma, or what in this case what is more traumatic than some other calls that were just like disturbing or gory, right?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect example because it's about what happened inside of you. You felt
Exactly.
helpless. Like, and that can really have someone you can either freeze or feel anxious or shut down. And that's what we're talking about is the internal experience,
Yeah.
which is so important. And
Yeah.
another thing I always love to point out, because someone's like, oh, I never experienced anything traumatic happening to me. Trauma is also what didn't happen to you, which a lot of people don't realize of really not growing up in an environment that was safe, whether it's physically safe,
Yeah.
emotionally safe, not
Yeah.
feeling cared for is huge, really,
Totally.
really huge. And so when some people are like, well, nothing traumatic happened to me, I'm like, well, maybe what didn't happen to you that you wish it did?
I think a lot of people don't know what's normal, right? For instance, I had a client who had a medical issue as a kid, and their parents just didn't help, right? Just kind of gaslit them and ignored them. Um, that is so traumatic, right? I mean, looking at that,
Crazy.
um, what's interesting too is I told a client recently, um, because trauma also has this imprint on your future, on your sense of self, and also on your relationships, right? Or some of my trauma clients, when things are good, that's when they're most anxious because they're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, right?
Yeah,
Or if someone is getting close to them and they're like falling in love, it's like that's when defenses get high and protective parts and
absolutely.
IFS
Yeah.
terms, get activated. Um, and sometimes people don't know that not everyone has that internal, chaos going on, right? Some people did actually have the white picket fence upbringing where things were normal, things were safe, parents were consistent and steady and warm or whatever. And some people are, had that type of upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, the best example I always use sometimes to like interject my personal life is, my husband and I, we both grew up very, very differently. I'm from a very traditional Italian family. We're loud and crazy and chaotic. And my husband is quiet Jewish family. And his mom, we always talk about who, she's had her own histories of trauma. She's not nurturing at all,
Yeah.
but that's how she always was. So that was consistent versus my crazy Italian family, you kind of never knew what you were getting.
Yeah.
So I was always way more anxious. And
Right.
some people would be like, well, that doesn't make sense because your family's so loving and this and that. And you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
but you didn't know if they were in a bad mood. And then, a wooden spoon would go flying or a slipper.
Yeah.
Versus
Right.
like my husband, who's not super anxious, is because he at least, while he, definitely struggled with not getting nurtured, he at least knew what to expect.
Yeah.
That part was consistent for him. So it's interesting how, you never know how things are going to shape somebody and can affect
Yeah.
somebody in different ways.
Yeah, with this subset of trauma called relational trauma, right? It's like trauma that happens relationally, and especially with caregivers, intimate partners, friends, people that we expect to be there for us or be consistent for us, and
Right,
trauma happens there, or abuse, whatever it might be. Yeah,
right.
yeah. But
Yeah,
this idea of unmet needs, I think, is a really good one. So a lot of people think about trauma as like what happened to me, but in your, like, to your point, what didn't happen, in my life. That's a great, looking at the other side of the coin. So
Yeah.
let's say that someone is on board and goes, "Hey, I'm listening to this right now, and maybe I've had some disruptive experiences in my life that maybe EMDR could help with."
Yeah.
If they reach out to someone like you, how do you explain EMDR as to like how it works and what an actual session looks like?
Yeah. So I always start with the first 3 sessions with any client is we're just getting to know each other and doing what I call phase 0 in EMDR. So really
Mm,
just establishing a relationship and building rapport. And in those first 3 sessions, we gather more information to determine if EMDR is the right fit. More likely than not, it usually is because it's applicable in many scenarios. But really, we're determining what type of treatment plan we're doing. So we know we can answer the questions that most people ask, like how long it takes, what does it look like, things like that. So we usually, if someone calls and says, how do I know if it's right for me? I'll say, well, what are the present day symptoms that you're struggling with? And in terms of what you want to work on, do you want to do like comprehensive treatment where you go to the earliest experiences you can imagine, target them and work through them? Or do you just want to work on present day issues? And that's when we have the conversation of you could still do EMDR, but it's going to be more symptom reduction, not symptom resolution, which comprehensive treatment really provides.
yeah.
So we really give that, overview of what to expect, and then just the overview of how it all works. Our experiences are encoded in our nervous system, and we need to be able to tap into the nervous system and feel those sensations and emotions in order to process them.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some cases, it's
Yeah.
that experience that we need to almost have that release. Or in cases like attachment trauma, it's about inviting in an adaptive response that we didn't get at the time, like a nurturing figure or a protective figure, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one idea is that in trauma, or when trauma is happening, or let's say a kind of classic example, kind of big T trauma like an assault, the brain kind of stops processing the memory component of what's happening. And so the memories do not get processed into long-term storage. That's the way I kind of think of it, or like start pitching it to clients. Um, can you talk about the memory piece and like what EMDR does from a memory perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we experience something in the moment, an assault or something, it, like you said, doesn't get encoded in the brain. So the way I once had a supervisor explain it, always stuck with me, is imagine if you like take like a piece of glass or something and you shatter it over your head, and bits and pieces of the memory kind of get stored like different puzzle pieces throughout your brain. So it's not a comprehensive picture. It's not a story of this happened, this is the beginning, the middle, and the end. So the memory itself gets stuck in its raw state, meaning that the images, the smells, the sounds, sensations are all stuck in that amygdala limbic system in their raw state and not encoded into the hippocampus where they do get encoded into long-term memory. So when we target a memory, for example, the way a target assessment is done in phase 3 is notice the image, we frequently say, but it could just be the sensory component, the
Mhm.
image, the smell, something that represents the worst part of that experience, because that's lighting up the limbic system, that where that those puzzle pieces are jammed up. And now let's get the left brain online, which is the storytelling brain. Now, when you picture that image and those sensory components, what belief do you have about yourself right now? And then going back to the right brain, what emotions do you feel as you remember this? And where do you notice that in your body? So it's really lighting up, the left and the right side of the brain, the top down. So we say it's a bottom up, top down, left, right treatment. So you're really involving the entire brain so you can light up those little puzzle pieces and start putting them together so that they can be filed correctly in the part of the brain, the hippocampus, that can store them as long-term memory, as a comprehensive narrative, like it happened, it's over now, and it's finished.
Yeah. And a result that I find is that people can talk about what happened to them without the nervous system response, right?
Talking head
Um,
syndrome. Yes, it's
yeah,
that's what I call it.
yeah.
Yeah. They're so
So
disconnected from the felt sense.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of times when they come in, well, what I find is that a lot of clients have some degree of psychological avoidance with the memory itself, right? So if I had a client today and I started asking her about this accident that she had, and you could tell she was kind of stepping around certain parts of the memory. This is the
Right.
first time we had talked about it. And also her nervous system got activated during some part of it. So I
Right.
just had her kind of slow down, stop, notice that, right?
Right.
Even working on giving a number, right? 0 to 100, the SUD scale, big
Yep.
EMDR piece of like what's happening inside right now and developing that awareness
How disturbing.
in preparation for doing the actual reprocessing work. But
Right.
that was one thing I mentioned to her is like, at some point we have to kind of go toward the activation, right? Or like you said, the worst part of the memory, the most salient part of the memory might be somewhere that we go eventually with the EMDR. And a big part of the EMDR therapist's responsibility is really titrating the work and making sure we don't flood the client, right? And overwhelm the client. Because I think, especially being new to EMDR and being excited, and the client being excited to like get through this and to, right, like
Just do
finally
it.
heal, just
Yeah.
do it. Like, can we just do it in the first session, right?
Right.
Sometimes that eagerness can get in the way, and a therapist might go, okay, great. Yeah, let's start reprocessing that accident, and end up getting a client flooded, or there's only 10 minutes left, before the next client.
Right.
So, it's a potent treatment, and the pacing of it to me is so important and takes time to develop.
Absolutely. And you bring up such an important point because, I think very often, especially in newly trained therapists, they get really excited to use it. And we think of EMDR just as, the reprocessing parts, like targeting the memory and working through it. But phase two, the resourcing is such an important part of the process. And for some clients, that is the work.
Right.
That's why we never want to skip phase two and phase one as well of, let's learn some tools so that if you do get overwhelmed when we start reprocessing, we have an arsenal of stuff that you can rely on to help calm your
Mhm.
nervous system. So it's not just co-regulation of the therapist and I working together. Like, I tell clients, I can help you regulate all the time if I'm here, but I don't live with you. So if you do get activated, which guess what? Once we start processing, the processing continues when you leave my office. I need you to have some self-regulation tools
Yep.
so
Yep.
that you can trust that your nervous system can help you come back from a very distressed place.
Yeah. Yeah, that clients will sometimes have vivid dreams after the session, right? And want to kind of prepare
Super.
them for what's happening with their brain. To me, the brain wants to finish processing those memories, just like a cut on your arm wants to heal.
Yes.
If it has the conditions needed to heal, right?
Right.
Like it's covered and clean and has, things to help it heal or whatever. So
Right.
once that process starts, you can see those memories becoming consolidated and doing what they've been trying to do, right? Ever
Right.
since the
Right.
event. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what EMDR does is it taps into the brain's natural healing abilities, the
Yeah.
adaptive information processing.
Can you talk a little bit more about once you get into the actual reprocessing, like what a session looks like or what a client could expect, even the kind of mechanism of BLS, like that you help establish with a client, how that
Yeah.
works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bilateral stimulation, the BLS, is really what makes EMDR, right? Those bilateral movements, and that can be audio. No, I'm going like this and saying audio, but it can be visual, where you're
Yeah.
tracking eye movements, tactile, where you have like the buzzers, as I call them, or some people call them paddles or tappers, where those alternate vibrations one at a time, or some people do audio, where it alternates tones, or you can do multiple modalities at the same time. So for some clients, who really they have a hard time getting activated, they're more hypoarousal.
Yeah.
We might use two forms of bilateral, like tactile and visual. So that really helps so once we start the reprocessing work, they can get activated enough into the window of tolerance to be able to process a memory. And that
Yeah.
basically looks like once we're ready to do that work, we go into phase 3, which is target assessment. And that's very, very quick. It's a quick process. It's really just meant to highlight the components of the memory and light them all up and activate the brain to reprocess, and then jump into the actual phase 4, the eye movement part. So the
Yeah.
components of memory are like the sensory component, right? So like the 7 magic questions, as we call it with standard protocol, the image, the worst part of the memory, the belief that you have about yourself when you focus on that experience, what you wish you could believe about yourself, even if you don't believe it right now. That's what I always tell clients. How much do you believe that? 0 to 7. When you focus on that experience, what emotions do you feel right now as you're focusing on that? 0 to 10, how disturbing is that to you right now? And as you focus on that image with that belief of I'm not good enough and feeling angry and that pit in your stomach, put all those things together and just notice what comes up. And then I'll have them follow. And I'll say to clients, just turn on your observer mind. You don't have to actively think of anything. Just observe wherever your brain or your body goes.
Yeah.
And turn off the buzzers. I'll just ask you what you noticed. You
Right.
don't have to actively think of anything. Just what do you get now?
Yeah, that's wonderful. We make these clips for social media, and I'm also like, Dana's just crushing it right now with these little like, that's such a clippable moment of like,
I love that we both think like that.
yeah,
Like,
how does BLS work? I'm like, that's gonna be a good clip. So you're giving me a lot of content here, which
so glad.
content is king. That's all I think about.
Absolutely.
Um,
Content's great because it helps. It's digestible information
yeah,
so that people can get information that helps them heal.
I think you're right, and I think the way people come to information now is through things like an Instagram clip or learning about EMDR, even EMDR being in the media these days.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother thing. So yeah, the mechanism, the BLS piece, stimulating both sides of the brain, facilitating this communication of the two sides of the brain is really important. Well, one thing I love about EMDR is that, like you said, you just hold the memory and then notice, right? Or
Right.
follow my fingers or whatever the tappers, and then just notice. Versus, I think a lot of therapy and traditional therapy that is kind of insight oriented is like, okay, you were abused when you were 7, and now you like get scared anytime anytime you're like intimate with someone. And then
Right.
we're kind of like, intellectualizing and drawing connections, which may be helpful to an extent to understand like
Right.
that thing
You hear.
affected this part of my life. But
Right.
again, it's like, what do we do about it? Right. And this reaction that is so much deeper than cognition or than,
Right.
whatever is,
Absolutely.
it
And the
really
way that I
uproots the
explain
trauma.
it,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Because the brain processes information from the bottom up. So often I'll tell clients, and for some people, the insight oriented therapies are enough, like the top down approaches
Yeah.
work for them and can get them to take that information top down and integrate that into the lower levels of their brain. When it doesn't, that's when we know we need things like EMDR because the brain processes information from the bottom up. That means when we experience a situation, it goes, brainstem, cerebellum, all of the non-thinking parts of our brain. So our body starts reacting before our conscious brain, that prefrontal cortex, that up here, before that part of our brain has any idea what's going on. So we might start having like a racing heart, shortness of breath, panic attack or something and go, what the hell is going on? And that's what we ask, like, well, what triggered you? I don't know. Yeah, I bet you don't know because your thinking brain didn't have a chance to figure out what was happening before your body started reacting.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you a question that's, I guess, like more of an insider baseball question or whatever, but like, what do you think is kind of the key ingredient of EMDR if you were to extract like what is the therapeutic component of it?
Mm,
Because as you mentioned, when the way you describe EMDR and even hitting on multiple pieces like the memories, the body, even right, connecting with the body, and helping
Yeah.
the body to do what it's trying to do, the belief part, the cognition part, right? Those pieces are all in EMDR. But yeah, what do you feel like is like really the core ingredient, or is it really
Yeah.
all of it?
Attunement to your client.
Hmm.
That really is, I think, with anything, obviously with EMDR, but in any situation, proper attunement to your client helps you really see their nervous system and see what's happening. Because oftentimes during processing, there's a lot of nonverbal cues that come up. And if you're not attuned to your client, you might miss that and be able to really help someone get to where they need to go. So I think that a core component of EMDR therapy is the therapist being in a regulated state and being able to stay present enough and observe what's happening with the client
Yeah.
and going from there. I think it's so important because,
Mm.
doing consultation for so many years now with other EMDR therapists, like one of the jokes I make all the time is everybody gets stuck on the NC. Why? Because therapists are trained in cognitive models. So all of a sudden, am I getting the right NC?
Yeah.
Who gives a shit?
Yeah. The
Like,
cognition.
what's their body doing? Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting out of our own heads and just
Mhm.
getting into that, that intersubjective space between client and therapist is really, really important.
It's interesting. Your answer surprised me in a delightful way because I think you're right. And for me, EMDR was the first like protocol that I ever learned, where
Yeah.
literally I'm doing a session and I'm looking at this darn piece of paper that has the protocol on it. And
Mhm.
I just learned it 2 days ago, right?
Right.
And so a part of me is pretty scared about screwing this up or missing a step, right? And also, like I mentioned, all the therapists in my group practice are trained in EMDR, and a lot of them get trained as they get hired. And so
Right.
it's brand new. And this anxiety of following it step by step or perfectly or losing my place means they end up getting caught staring at their piece of paper when
Right.
something's happening with the client, right? And they kind of forget that they're a therapist first,
Yep.
or to really adapt the protocol to what's happening in the room or to that specific client. And that's something that I've like taken on my own, and having done EMDR for years is I kind of have my own way of doing it, which in a way feels anti EMDR and anti like there's all these protocols coming out now and everyone has a protocol. And I think there's some like obsession with that. And some
Oh, you
people
see on like
that,
Facebook groups all the time. Is there
yeah,
a protocol for this?
yeah, the fear of dogs, like,
Yeah.
yeah, just
That's called
probably.
anxiety. Standard
Yeah.
protocol applies.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
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 It's Francine Shapiro's, the founder of EMDR therapy, never intended for EMDR to be a structured set of protocols and phases.
Mm.
She meant it to be a way to conceptualize cases, a way to conceptualize symptoms and a client and what they're struggling with. And that's why I love Laura Parnell's work. She's really attachment focused EMDR because, watching her videos and stuff, I say to my staff all the time, we're all EMDR trained here. And when we watch her stuff, we're like, oh, you do all these things as a therapist, as an EMDR therapist. And watching her do it is like, oh, you do that too? Oh my God. Okay. So it is a thing. Like, I'm not going off script here. It's just attuning to your client,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is good therapy.
Yeah. And what's funny is, years ago when I got trained in clinical hypnosis, and I used to do a lot of clinical hypnosis, and I know that one reason why it works is because it actually works. Another reason why is because I have a strong belief that it's going to work. And when clients come to me, and back then, I had someone with a phobia, a fear of vomiting, and treated her in one session. Again, in part because hypnosis works, in part because my belief that this would work and help her was so high.
Right.
And she was ready to let it go. She was ready to work through this fear, right? Same
Yep.
thing of someone who's really ready to work through their trauma, right? And move past it, or whatever, really ready to heal. And some people are not. They think they are and they show up, and then maybe they're not, or maybe they get freaked out, right? Or maybe the therapist does go too fast or whatever it might be. But I find the same to be true with EMDR. And when I had a pretty good hand on the model and my belief in it was really high, even if I wasn't doing the model perfectly, my clients were getting better, right?
Right.
And some of them in as little as a few sessions of EMDR, where they had years of, again, traditional talk therapy and
Right.
not a lot of progress. So my belief in it is still high, and I really tell my clinicians, like, yes, learn the protocol, like, yes, learn the steps, but also really get clear on your belief in this model and your belief in, really going back to just being a therapist, your ability as a therapist to be therapeutic, to be attuned, to be, you
Right.
know,
Be present,
be
hold space
present.
with
Yeah.
somebody. Yeah. The
Yeah.
biggest thing that's, the biggest difference between like talk therapy or cognitive models versus EMDR is, with something like CBT, it's the therapist is the agent of change
Yeah.
for the client versus with EMDR, the client's nervous system is the agent of change. It's their own nervous system doing the work. The therapist is just the conductor, so to speak, keeping the train on the tracks. And so that's what I tell clients is that, this is you doing the work. I'm just guiding you there. But as long as you're willing to go there, I know it works. I believe in it, right? And that's a huge part, like you said. But it's also their willingness to do it. And a lot of people are like, oh, this isn't going to work for me. I've tried so many other things. Is can you believe enough to try?
Yeah. Yes. And what I've learned is the way that I pitch it, even let's say for a client who hasn't heard of EMDR, same way I would pitch hypnosis, which is with a very open hand of, hey,
Mhm.
there's this thing we could try. I see you getting stuck on this memory or on this fear or whatever.
Right.
We can try this weird thing where, you know,
Yeah.
you hold that in your mind and then you hold these weird tappers, right? And
Right.
I'm willing for it to also not work. And they see that I'm not attached to it and don't have a strong agenda about this.
Like a,
Um,
a Hail Mary.
yeah, exactly. Like, we've got other things we can try or whatever, and so the stakes are low in that regard as I kind of set it up of, like,
Right.
can we get curious about what this is like and curious about how this goes? And clients that have fears about EMDR of, like, first of all, what if it taps into something I didn't know was there, which is a
Right.
common fear, right? Of memory, repressed memory,
Absolutely.
whatever. Um, or what if it's too much? Both understandable fears. And what I tell them, rather than like, hey, it's not going to be too much, we're not going to find, repressed memories, because I don't know that. But what
Right.
I do know is I'm going to be with you every step of the way.
Exactly.
Totally hear that
Beautiful.
fear. Makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense that
Yeah.
you're holding those fears. Um, and can we keep talking about those? And also, I'm
Right.
reminding you that you have the brake pedal. And so if we start getting into this work or into the reprocessing and you're like, dude, this is too much,
Yeah.
then
That's
we
optional.
work our way out of it, right?
Absolutely.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause it's true. Like I tell clients like I'm not omniscient. If I did, I would be playing lotto numbers, not doing therapy. Right.
Yeah,
Like,
you and me both. Yeah.
right. So I don't know either, but we're gonna figure it out together. And that's huge for especially clients with that like attachment trauma of, you went through traumatic experiences alone. You don't have to go through the healing alone. And that's a big thing. A lot of people are asking me, like, can you do EMDR by yourself? Like, we see that question all the time. There's programs that, claim you can do EMDR by yourself at home. I wouldn't recommend them because you don't want to go through that alone. Because for some people who went through the trauma alone, that could actually just be re traumatizing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would agree. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. And I think healing happening in the context of a relationship, in this case, relationship with your therapist, that you trust,
Right.
um, is is crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I like to say to some clients who ask, like, well, you could learn how to do open heart surgery on yourself, but would you? Or would you want somebody who has all the skills and the training and the compassion to sit with you
Yeah.
while you go through it together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've given me more Instagram clips than I could have asked for so far, Dana, and so I'm already indebted to you,
Like,
but,
listen, you have my number. You can always let me know when you need one.
yeah, I'll just text you late at night, like, "Hey, can
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
just
exactly.
record, like,
Just do something real quick.
17 seconds for me of pure gold?" Um, we we got, like, maybe 5 minutes left. What do you feel like is unsaid so far with this conversation, or anything you wanna make sure folks hear today, um,
Mm.
as we start wrapping up?
What is unsaid? That's a good question. I think the biggest thing for like clients to take away with this, you don't have to have it all figured out before you call a therapist. You wouldn't be calling a therapist if you had it all figured out.
Mm.
All you have to know is you're struggling and you need help figuring out not just why, but you need help, getting to that deeper level, that body work, that somatic piece. You need someone to hold space for you so you can feel safe enough to go there. And so
Yep.
like not have it all figured out. And EMDR is not like a holy grail. It's the only thing that works. We see all the time clients ask, like, does it work for this? Does it work for that? Like with like ADHD, for example, right? ADHD is a neurological condition. It doesn't help that, but it can help with secondary things like experiences that have affected you because of your ADHD. Or like
Yeah.
bipolar, traumatic memories that you have, like shame and things like that, things that might have happened when you were manic. It can help with that.
Yeah.
So of understanding what it can help with and what it can't.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great. I mean, one benefit of there being so much information in the world now, or even again, someone being able to discover EMDR like through a TikTok clip, is clients often come in with some knowledge of it. And there's also a downside to that too, that they come in with just partial knowledge about this thing, or they feel like this is going to be the magic fix for my life. Or again, in reality, it's like if this piece of the trauma work is in place, what other pieces are there, right? Whether it's the drinking or the cutting or the binging or the relationships, right? Or the health issues, whatever it might be. So really looking at the client holistically, I think is crucial.
Right. The whole picture is so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
I can't thank you enough for doing this. Of course, I want you to let folks know how they can learn more about you, follow along, get in touch, and the offerings you have right now for your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I own and operate an EMDR focused practice called Peaceful Living Mental Health Counseling, and we're licensed to see clients in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Florida. So they can just go to our website, peacefulllivingmentalhealthcounseling.com. Or for more information about me, you can go to danacarretta.com, 2 R's, 2 T's. Everybody always leaves out a T somewhere. And that has tons of information about the individual consultation that I offer to other EMDR therapists, as well as all information about EMDR. That's also on my Instagram and my TikTok, which is at _EMDR_coach. So the EMDR coach is where you can find all that info on my books. I'm going to have some online courses coming out soon. So all of those things, basically all things trauma-informed care.
So cool. Yeah, we'll obviously put links to everything in the description, whether people are listening or watching on YouTube. It's also crazy, just kind of finishing where we started, Dana, just how far you've come with all this. It's like
It's crazy, right?
all your years ago. Yeah, I mean, you've just really established such a great business with your actual practice, and also this kind of online brand you have, this personal brand you have with EMDR and trauma and everything you're putting out. So I congratulate you on that, and
Thank
keep
you.
doing it
Some
because
credit of
people
that
really
goes
need
to
this
you because you taught me a lot about branding and all of those things. Like I remember so many of our conversations from those conference rooms in Michigan of all of the things. And so like I very much think of you all the time because
Oh, that's
I owe a
nice.
lot of that to you.
That's too nice. Yeah, I just see it as if more therapists could get online and talk about what they know, more people can get help and can suffer
Absolutely.
less. And so that's how I kind of see it. Like the branding stuff, the marketing stuff, the content is just really like a medium to helping people, which is what all
Absolutely.
you and I have ever wanted to do, right? As therapists.
Right.
So
I always
I,
tell like
yeah,
other therapists I work with, if people don't know you're there, how can you help them?
yeah,
So really speaking to what you really love to do. And the person who clicks with your message, I mean, like they'll find you and amazing things can happen.
totally. Yeah. And that personal connection can happen through a piece of content, and there's
Right.
kind of someone for everyone out there. So that's
Right.
great. Thank you again, Dana.
Thank
I
you
so
so much for
appreciate your
having me.
time, and we'll have you back sometime for sure.
Absolutely. I would love that.
Thanks again. Thanks for listening to another episode of Going Inside. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share your favorite episode with a friend. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at John Clarke Therapy, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarketherapy.com. See you next time.